Hello, 6th grade students. This week's lesson includes 4 characteristics of all living things, sexual and asexual plant reproduction, and tropisms. Let's get started. I'd like you to make sure that you fill out this paper as we discuss the characteristics that all living things share. I'd like you to fill out this paper when we talk about the rest of the PowerPoint. Your paper might look a little bit different, or it might look just like this one, but that's the one we want you to fill out. Here we go. Take your characteristics of all living things page and make sure that you fill in these 4 items, and I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. The first thing that all living things share, a characteristic that all living things share, that means plants and animals and anything else, everything, humans, animals, plants, all living things obtain and use resources for energy. Everyone has to obtain and use resources for energy. Now we know that plants obtain their own resources for energy by making their own food, but they still go into the characteristics of all living things. Humans or animals are hunters, gatherers, predator, or prey, or they go to Food Lion to get their food today. They're still obtaining and using resources for energy. So this would mean plants that go through photosynthesis, or anyone who goes and gets their own food. And then using resources for energy, that means everybody, humans and plants and animals, we all go through respiration. And why do we go through respiration? To get energy. All right. The next is responding to stimuli. It doesn't matter if you're a plant or an animal or a human, we all respond to stimuli. Stimuli means, for instance, if I went to punch you in the eye, you would blink or back up. That's natural. That's your response to stimuli. The stimuli is the punch, and the response is you back up. Now, would I really do that? Nah, maybe I wouldn't. No, I'm just teasing. I would never do that. But you get the point. If someone goes to like flick you in the eye, the flick would be the stimuli, and your response would be that you'd back up or close your eyes. So all living things respond to stimuli. And then what about reproduce? All living things reproduce. They might do it one of 2 ways. Humans and animals reproduce sexually. Flowers reproduce sexually. But there's a whole different way of reproduction called asexual reproduction. And we're going to learn about that one a little bit more today. So far, characteristics of all living things obtain and use resources for energy. All living things respond to stimuli. All living things reproduce, whether it be sexual or asexual reproduction. And the final one, all living things grow and develop. I rarely see anything that doesn't grow and develop or grow and change. Everything grows and changes or grows and develops in some way. It might be that their life cycle is very short. It might be that it's long like a human. But everything, all living things grow and develop in some way. And that's pretty much all that you have to fill out for that right now. Reproduction. At this point, you should be filling out the form that looks like this. So, reproduction, sexual reproduction. A process of reproduction that requires a sperm cell in pollen and an egg cell in the ovule to combine to produce a new organism. So, if we're not talking sperm and egg, then we are not talking sexual reproduction. So if there's not a sperm and there's not an egg to join together, then there's not sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction. all flowering plants undergo sexual reproduction. So if you see a plant and a flower is on it, it's going through sexual reproduction. If you see a plant and a flower is on it, it's going through sexual reproduction. But then there's something totally different called asexual reproduction. Asexual, A means not. Sexual means obviously sexual. So not sexual means there's not a sperm and there's not an egg. This is a process of reproduction that involves only one parent plant or a plant part, and produces offspring identical to the parent plant. You may think of this in forms of cloning. Cloning is something you guys could probably understand just because of the sci-fi movies and things that we've seen before. How do we clone a plant? Many plants can grow new plants asexually from their plant parts. If a plant is cut or damaged, it can sprout new growth from the stems, roots, or leaves. So, if we have this little piece of this potato, the eye of the potato, see down here where the eye could grow a little tiny shoot, and then roots could grow down through the bottom, and we get a whole potato plant that can grow a whole bunch of potatoes. These cacti at the top, because cactus is one plant, but cacti is plural, more than one. Cacti grow little tiny babies on the edges of their individual leaves, and these are called babies or buds. So the buds grow on the edges. Now I've been told that at the end of Forest Brook Road there's a humongous cacti over by that little farm, by the horse farm, and kids see these tiny little babies at the edges of them all the time, but they didn't really know what they were, but now they do. So you all can look for that big cactus at the end of Forest Brook Road. So if we cut a little section out of this, it could grow a new plant. So I could cut this out and grow it. And remember these little buds. So these are asexual reproduction, when plants can grow new plants asexually from their plant parts. So the first method is called tubers, and this will go on your sheet. Number 1, tubers. They're underground stems. The eyes or buds of tubers, for example potatoes like I just showed you, grow into roots and shoots to produce new plants. And this is what a potato plant looks like. See how they have a flower at the top and they have the potato underneath? That might make you wonder. So if it has a flower on the top and it has a potato underneath, that's right. Potato plants have sexual reproduction on top and asexual reproduction below. That's confusing. But just remember, if a plant has a flower, it goes through sexual reproduction. That doesn't mean it can't also be reproducing or cloning parts of itself through one of these other methods. So tubers, eyes of potatoes. I want you to write tubers in the box and then write example potato eyes. Then the second type that you need to write in the next box is bulbs. Bulbs, for example onions, are big buds made of a stem and a special kind of leaf. So where you write bulbs, write onions in the same box. And these would be what bulbs look like. So you should have written tubers and wrote potatoes, eyes of potatoes, and then in the next box you should have written bulbs and onions for the example. Another way that we can clone a plant, so these are 3 ways so far to clone a plant, are by runners. Strawberry plants and ivy grow along the ground in runners that look like this. They run across the ground. They form new plants. Stems that run along the ground, you could start with one piece and it'll just run and make more plants. New strawberry or some ivy grow from the tips of runners. So far you should have tubers and potato eyes. And then you should have bulbs in the next box and onions. And you should have runners and write strawberries and ivy. Those are the two examples for runners, strawberries and ivy. All right. Also, many lawn grasses grow from runners. So if you want to write grasses with ivy and strawberries, that would help you to study for the quiz. So far, one more time. Tubers and potato eyes. Bulbs and onions. And runners has 3. Strawberries, ivy, grasses. Strawberries, ivy, and grasses. There are other ways that reproduction can happen asexually, from stem cuttings. When a piece of cut stem is planted, roots may form from the cutting, and then a full plant develops. This is a cutting of sugarcane. Examples are sugarcane and pineapple. So you should write stem cuttings in one of the boxes, in a 4th box, and write sugarcane and pineapple as the example. And then get ready for the second to the last box. So far you should have had box 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 should have said stem cuttings. You should have written sugarcane and pineapple. P-I-N-E-A-P-P-L-E. P-I-N-E-A-P-P-L-E. Pineapple. Okay, number 5. The 5th way for asexual reproduction is plants can reproduce by their own roots. Some fruit trees and bushes send up suckers or new shoots from their roots. Some roots, like sweet potatoes, can produce new plants. So for roots, I want you to write sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes. P-O-T-A-T-O-E-S. Sweet potatoes. You could write the word suckers if you want to, but don't get the wrong idea. We're not talking candy here, people. So roots, sweet potatoes is the example, and you could say suckers, just so that you remember that it's sending up new shoots from the roots. And our last type of asexual reproduction is by leaves. Some houseplants produce little plants right on their leaves. For example, and I want you all to write, leaves and African violets. African violets can produce plants from leaves placed on top of the soil. That's a shocker, isn't it? You literally can just take a leaf right off an African violet plant. They have such pretty flowers. And you could take just the leaf and put it on some soil, just on top of the soil. And it's going to grow its own roots and start growing its own whole plant. So a lot of people who work in the horticulture world, horticulture means working with plants all the time and propagating plants. That's what cloning a plant is. Asexual reproduction and propagating is the word that they usually say. When you're trying to propagate a plant, you're trying to clone it. Propagate is a big word. Propagate. Propagate. Sounds like propagate, but it's not. It's propagate. When you're trying to propagate a new plant, you're trying to clone a new plant, or you're trying to reproduce the plant by asexual reproduction. So it's one of these 6 things that we've just studied. Whenever you try to propagate an African violet, it's very easy. You literally just take a leaf and put it into a little pot and water it, and it will begin to propagate or to create another plant. which I think is pretty cool. So the last form of asexual reproduction is leaves, and African violets is the example. Now, at this point, you should be ready to look at this picture right here. And I'm going to try to help you see it better, but it looks like a little bit of it's cut off at the bottom. Asexual reproduction happens in a couple different ways. Asexual reproduction, which is what you should have had in the center of your paper, happens 1 by tubers, 2 by roots, 3 by bulbs, 4 by runners, 5 by stem cuttings, and 6 by leaves. Tubers, roots, bulbs, runners, stem cuttings, and leaves. And if you look, here's number 1 is tubers, right down here. Number 1. Number 2 is roots. The roots are right here, number 2. Number 3 is bulbs. Number 4 is runners from a strawberry plant. And number 5 is the stem, like sugar cane or a pineapple. And number 6 is the leaves, like the African violet. So one more time. Tubers, potatoes. Number 2, roots. What was the example you had for roots? Turn to a friend and tell them. Good job. Number 3, bulbs, like onions. Number 4, runners, like strawberries. There were 2 other examples. Turn to a friend and tell them what they were. Number 5, stem cuttings, like sugarcane. Turn to a friend and tell them the other one. Good. Number 6, leaves, like African violets. Now, if you notice, those are all asexual reproduction. A means not sexual. These are not sexual. They do not have sperm and egg cells uniting. But sexual reproduction happens only in one part of the plant, if the plant has a flower on top. So sexual reproduction happens where there's a flower, and we know the whole story of sexual reproduction. Whenever the pollen tube is grown down from the top of the stigma down to the ovary, and then pollen grain releases a sperm cell, and it slides down the slippery slide of the pollen tube and slips right into an ovule. And at that point, that's fertilization. That is why it's called sexual reproduction. So only one part of the plant is sexual reproduction, and all the other parts of the plant can reproduce asexually. The last thing that we're going to look at is tropisms. Tropisms, a tropism is a plant's response to a stimulus. Remember I told you that plants, all living things, respond to stimuli? Well, plants respond to a stimulus in 4 different ways. I'm going to teach you the stimulus. Remember I told you that whenever I go to punch you in the eyes, that's the stimulus, and the response is you back up or blink, or you cover your face. Well, a plant responds to stimuli. Stimulus is 1. Stimuli is more than 1. So, a plant responds to stimuli in 4 different ways. That means there's 4 different stimuli, and there's 4 different responses. These are directly linked to their response. So the stimuli and the response right here are directly linked. The stimulus is sunlight. How does a plant respond to sunlight? Tropism is when a plant moves. It moves in response to something. So if the sun is shining, how does the plant move in response to the sun? It moves in response to it by phototropism. And we'll watch a little video in just a moment. After the screencast is done, your teacher will play the video. So when the sun is shining, The plant's response is phototropism. Now you have tropisms in the corner of all of your handout. So all four corners, I want you in one of the corners to write the stimulus is sunlight. The response is phototropism. So when the sun shines, photo means light. Tropism means to bend or to move. So to bend or move toward light. Photo means light. We learned that with photosynthesis. So to bend or move toward the light is responding to the stimulus of sunlight. Hydrotropism is to bend or move to water. Hydro means water. To bend or move to water. So the stimulus is water. And the response is hydrotropism. The next one is gravity. The stimulus is gravity. How does a plant respond to gravity? That's a weird one. Well, it does just like we do. It gets pulled down to the ground. Its roots get pulled down into the ground, but it has to work against gravity to grow its shoot up and out of the soil. So plants seem to be pretty strong because they have to work very hard against gravity. That's called gravitropism. Here's the word gravity. You can see almost the whole word gravity. And tropism means to bend or move. So to bend or move toward or against gravity. And the last stimulus is touch. Look at the T and look at the H. T and look at the H. When a plant touches another object, it goes through, its response is thigmotropism. Now that is a very, very weird word. But I tell my students, touch starts with a T and it ends with an H. Thigmotropism starts with a T and has an H right after it. So you think touch thigmotropism, touch thigmotropism, T and H, thigmotropism. I tell everyone, turn around right now and touch your own, like take one of your hands and grab a hold of your arm and wrap your hand around your arm. You're thigmoing yourself. You are touching yourself. So wrap your hand around your arm, grab your wrist, and thigmo yourself. Thig means touch. So T and H, thigmo, T and H. So the response to touch is thigmotropism. And then finally, you're going to see a video that goes along with thigmotropism. An example of a plant responding to touch is a Venus flytrap. So in just a moment, you're going to see these videos with your teacher. So right now, before you get finished, you need to make sure that in the corner of all corners of your worksheet, that you have the stimulus, sunlight, and response as the response is phototropism. In another corner, you needed to write the stimulus of water, and the response is hydrotropism. In another corner, gravity is the stimulus, and the response is gravitropism. And then touch, and the response is thigmotropism. And I hope that you enjoyed this lesson. Be ready for Friday's quiz. Remember, there's always a quiz on Friday. So don't ask. There's always a quiz on Friday. Thank you. Have a great day.